Good morning. Thank you for joining us again this morning for another Jagged Globe presentation. My name's Tom Briggs. I'm the marketing director at Jagged Globe. I'm based here in Sheffield. And today we've got expedition leader Mungo Ross with us. Firstly, just a reminder, next week we're going to be here again at the same time, 11 a.m. and we're going to have expedition leader Becky Coles with us, who's going to talk a bit of a different talk, so less of a sort of slideshow about a trip, but we're going to talk about planning and preparation leading up to going away on an expedition and what that might involve. And that might be talking about the kind of training in terms of, mountaineering, outdoor training you might do, as well as physical training, mental preparation, that sort of thing. So that'll be next week. Okay, so our speaker today is outdoor instructor and expedition leader Mungo Ross. Mungo was born in Port Glasgow. He was brought up in Edinburgh and he currently lives just north of Aviemore on the edge of the Cairngorms National Park. He qualified as a summer ML, so as an outdoor instructor in 1972, and he was involved with early expeditions in the 1970s, traveling to Greenland and Iceland with the Brathay Exploration Society. He first worked for Jagged Globe in 1998. He was invited to lead a private group to Paldor, which is a peak in Nepal. And since then, he's led a further 74 expeditions and treks for us all over the world. Now, today, Mungo is going to talk about Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, and this is a mountain he knows pretty well. He's led quite a few trips there over the years. The format of today's session will be, again, it'll be sort of 30 to 40 minute presentation, and then we'll have some Q&A afterwards, up to 20 minutes of Q&A. So feel free to think of questions for Mungo. They don't have to be absolutely about Kilimanjaro. Bear in mind that he's led many trips all over the world. So yeah, I'll just bring Mungo in now. Good morning, Mungo. How are you today?
Morning, Tom. How are you?
Yes, I'm very, very well, thanks. So how many times have you actually been to Kilimanjaro or led trips there?
Led 11 trips to Kilimanjaro now.
11 trips. And over what sort of time frame?
The first one was Millennium Trip.
Okay, right.
And 7 of them have been Western Breach, 3 Lamosher Glades, and but the first one was 2000.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Right. I'm just bear with me 1 second whilst I rack up your slides. So we were talking earlier, weren't we, about the film Climbing Blind with Jesse Dufton that's available on the iPlayer at the moment and on Vimeo. Just talking about how that is an incredible film. If people haven't seen that, I definitely recommend it. Right, here we go. Apologies, it's just taking me a little bit. So we're going to switch across to Mungo's slides, and he's going to take us through on a photographic journey on through Kilimanjaro. So over to you, Mungo.
Okay, Tom. Do we have the first picture?
There we go.
Oh, I don't have that on my screen. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So Kilimanjaro, it's highest mountain in Africa. It's 5895 meters. That's just under 19,500 feet. It's the 4th highest of the 7 summits, and it's become very, very popular for people to climb. But if we launch into the trip, it's a lot of people think of this as an easy climb. The walking and the actual physical exercise is not particularly demanding if you're hill fit before you go, but it's a full-on trip. There's little slack time in it. So typically we'll fly from our various destinations, arrive at Kilimanjaro Airport in the evening, get to the hotel in Moshi, so late evening, it can be 10:30 at night, and then we're out the next day to go onto the mountain. So if you go on to the next picture, Tom, we'll drive by bus from Moshi to whichever the route we're going to be taking, where there's then a good deal of sorting out to do. So we get to the car park and offload, and next picture, the local guys have to get all our kit and sort out the loads. Everything has to be weighed carefully to sort out porter loads, and we get ourselves organised. And there's an administration. The park is a national park. It became a national park in 1977, and it's heavily controlled. You can only climb Kilimanjaro if you go with a local agency and use local guides, and they keep control of this. So every park entrance, you have to sign in and register and make sure you've paid your park fee. So there's that to do. And then next picture, the local guys turn up to collect their loads, and this was actually taken in one of my earlier trips, but nothing has changed very much. The guys, a lot of them are still hardly dressed for, as we would describe, dressed for the hill. They turn up as they are, and the loads are allocated to them. And next picture.
And just to interject there, Mungo,
yeah.
I mean, nowadays, of course, we do have a bit more technical kit, don't we, for the porters? I mean, we'll probably see some of that later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the next picture. This is us. We're all decked out in trekking kit with our rucksacks and trekking poles and sun hats and all the rest of it. Something that has changed just in the 20 years I've been going is that certainly the agency we're using, and probably the other better agencies, are now equipping their porters better. They get proper equipment, they get sleeping bags and somewhere to stay. And this is just introducing our chief guide. This is Thomas, who I worked with on several occasions. He led our Millennium trip. And when I went out last summer again, and I asked for Thomas, I asked about him at the hotel, and very sadly, they just buried him the day before. He'd passed away just a few weeks before. He was very experienced when he first took us in Millennium, and he must have been up the mountain over 1,000 times. Another of our guides, Charles, again, lovely man, and these people are up and down the mountain several times a year, and this is what they do for a living. So they know the mountain very well, very experienced guys, and lovely manner about them. So just to acknowledge our local leaders. On Mount Meru, which we do before we go to Kilimanjaro very often for acclimatization. Meru is a national park. There are a lot of wild animals, and it's obligatory to have a ranger with you. And this is Amen, our ranger on the latest trip. They carry rifles, but interestingly, if you look carefully, he's got his mobile phone in his hand, and I suspect he uses his phone a lot more than he uses his rifle. As far as I know, the rangers have never fired a shot in anger, but it is obligatory to have a ranger with us who's armed. Because as we go through the park, the advantage of going to Mount Meru is it is a national park, and you get your kind of safari thrown in at the same time. And there's lots to see in these trips, so we can get up fairly up close the animals with the advice of the park ranger. So if we move on, just to show you the kind of variety we can see, that's quite obviously an elephant, which was right beside the road as we drove into the park. And a close-up of a giraffe. These are delightful animals, which appear to be very gentle and easygoing, but apparently they fight each other. The males fight each other to the death. And here's a couple of adults. If you look carefully on the animal on the right, there has a couple of birds pecking insects off its skin. And that's a monkey, the colobus monkey. Again, quite common to see them.
And it's fair to say, isn't it, Mungo, that this is obviously in Mount Meru National Park. If you just go directly to Kilimanjaro, apart from maybe seeing a colobus monkey in the trees, on sort of day one, you're not going to see this sort of variety of wildlife, are you?
No, unfortunately, you see very little wildlife on Kilimanjaro. You see the colobus monkeys fairly regularly in the forest, but you don't see much else. The animals have crept away. The buffalo in the previous picture, they're actually the animals that to be most wary of. Apparently, they can be quite frisky, and the rangers say that you need to be wary of them. But the next picture is some kind of little lizard. So it's insects, animals great and small. And the next one, this is a chameleon, delightful little things, which we see climbing about in the higher up the mountain. And this is a white-necked raven, so it's got a lot of bird life. And again, it's fascinating in these trips, if you have somebody with a very specialist knowledge, an ornithologist or a geologist or a botanist, who can actually tell you a lot more detail. It is fascinating. There's just so much to see if we have time to look. And this is another bird on, this is actually on Kilimanjaro. But a lot of bird life and lots of flowers as well. This is actually mountain gladiolus. And the next picture is a beautiful flower. This is actually the unofficial, semi-official emblem of Kilimanjaro. Beautiful little flower. And these are thistles, which are actually growing in Kilimanjaro. These aren't in my back garden, by the way. I was taken in Kilimanjaro. And these are the perennial everlasting flowers that grow very high on Kilimanjaro, above most of the other vegetation zone, well above the forest. And this is the Belia, which is spectacular, and the giant groundsel, which are just magnificent, prehistoric looking. So lots of vegetation. And what makes this trip particularly interesting is going through the different vegetation zones. So anyway, here we are in Mount Meru setting off, and it's obligatory, like I say, to walk with a ranger, and the rangers insist that we stick together. And very often these trips we can have quite large groups. It can be 10, 12, maybe 14 people, but we are herded on Mount Meru because the ranger insists that we walk together, so we have safety from the animals. On Mount Meru there are 2 camps which have huts on them, and you can expect these to be fairly congested. It's a fairly popular mountain, and there's limited accommodation which has to be booked, but there are huts with little small dormitory accommodation. And this is the first hut, and then as you go above the second, up to the second hut, you can get out of the forest and you get your view looking 40 or 50 miles across the plains to Kilimanjaro in the distance. When we get to the second huts, the saddle huts on Mount Meru, in the afternoon we'll try and get up to the Little Meru, which is a subsidiary top at 3,820 metres for the acclimatisation. And bear in mind, this is only the second day trekking. So we're already at just under 4,000 metres just in the second day. So people are really feeling the altitude, but it's very good acclimatisation. So we climb Meru, Little Meru, go back down to the huts. And then the next day, if you move on to the next picture, this is looking from Little Meru across. You can see the huts down in the bottom left of the picture there. The trail we leave during the night, we go up in the dark, up the path there, up this ridge, over Rhino Point, and then down and follow the crest of the ridge. The ridge is actually the edge of a former huge volcanic cone, which blew out, and you can see the cone down there of a more recent volcano that's erupted inside the old crater. So like I say, we'll typically leave at midnight. You could do this in daylight, but it's a combination of it's good practice to get up in the dark. It's also the best weather tends to be first thing in the morning if you want the clear views from the summit. And it's quite a long day because you have to get back down off the mountain. On the way up, there's a little rocky buttress that we have to traverse round, which in the past, the first few times I did it, this was quite exciting. It's not difficult climbing, but it's quite exposed. And they've now put chains on it. As you can see here in daylight, it's not very difficult climbing, but the chains are now being put in place to make it a bit easier to negotiate. And this is looking along at the final summit ridge, very spectacular mountain day. And this is as the sun's coming up, a very rocky, gravelly volcanic ridge with a spectacular view as the sun comes up, looking across the valley, the plains towards Kilimanjaro in the distance. And this is the summit of Mount Meru, which is at an altitude of
4,556 meters, I think.
Yep. So almost the height of Mont Blanc in 3 days from Britain. So a lot of people find this very, very tough. We're barely acclimatized. Quite a few people have to turn back in this, but it's brilliant acclimatization for moving on to Kilimanjaro itself.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about statistics a little bit, aren't we, later, yeah. Mungo? But you know, the purpose of Mount Meru is first and foremost it's acclimatization. But like you say, I mean, it's a big ask to go to 4,500 meters in 3 days. And in fact, we spend an extra day than the standard itinerary, don't we? Because we take a bit more time to come back down, which again gives us more acclimatization.
That's right. So coming down, the next picture, this illustrates it's not a very good illustration, but you can see the dust being kicked up by some of the people's feet here. It's volcanic ash, same as in Kilimanjaro, a lot of gravel and scree and ash, so it can be very, very dusty. So it's a very good idea to have some kind of face covering. You want a buff or some kind of face mask, because it can be extremely dusty. And this makes a point, just a wee bit about mountain rescue. It's the only time I've had somebody actually break a bone. The guy slipped, very easy to do, and cracked a bone in his ankle, and we had to evacuate him. This was fairly early on, and the evacuation, it involved radioing down to the huts. Some of the local guys came up with a stretcher and carried him off the hill. He was taken down off the hill, jeeped back to Moshi, and was in the hospital by midnight. On Kilimanjaro now, they have these stretchers with wheels on them, so they become much more aware of and kind of prepared for evacuation and mountain rescue. And a place in Kili where these stretchers are around. And because there are roads, access to all the mountains, you can get somebody down off the hill, and the ambulances can come up the access roads and get somebody off fairly quickly. And more recently, in the last few years, they've actually started introducing helicopters. These weren't available in the past, but there are helicopters now, so it is possible to get people flown off in the event of needing to be evacuated. So this typical kind of assembly, you can reckon that for each client or our team member, you'll have between 3 and 4 local people to support us. It's a combination of just the number of people that are involved, but also it's a very important form of employment for local people there. So obviously the more people they can employ, the better. So there's a limit on how much each porter can carry in order to employ more people. So for a group of 10 of us, we'll have 35 to 40 support staff. And bear in mind that right now, when this pandemic's going on and tourism has come to an end, all these guys have lost their livelihood because they depend on this for their income. Interestingly, on just on that, on Mount Meru in the past, they reduced the load that porters would carry in order to employ more people because they were poaching animals out the reserve. And I read a thing recently during this pandemic that apparently the poaching in the game reserves has started increasing again because guys have no livelihood. And the thing that saddens me is that what drives the poaching industry is it's a market, people will pay for it. But anyway, that's another issue. Here's a picture showing Kilimanjaro. Basically, there are several routes up it. This is looking at it from, I've just seen this bit.
Pretty much the southern aspect, isn't it? Showing the Shira Plateau out on the left.
Yeah. So the Shira Plateau on the left, so the Lamosho Glades trip, which we did for a while, comes in from the left across the plateau there. There are 2 routes, the Umbi and the Nachami, that come directly up from the south. We're looking north here. The descent route, the Mawika, is a bit to the right, and then there's a route that comes in from Kenya to the north, the Rongai route. Kenya's to the north there. So after Meru, we go back to Moshi and get a night in a hotel, get a shower, get some laundry done. And even though it's been a really tough 3 days, it's great to get back and get freshened up before setting off for Kilimanjaro. And this has set us up really well for Kilimanjaro. So we'll get back in the bus, drive back to whichever route we're taking. And this is actually the sort of the Umbi route, but I'm going to go up take you up the Lamosho Glades first of all, but they're all typically much the same. We drive to the park entrance, do the check-in again, and then start setting off up the road through the forest. The road eventually disappears, becomes a footpath, a well-made path, and the typical routine is that there may well be other people on it, but with a large group, you're walking along, and then you have to step by to let the porters through. So there's a typical kind of shout out for porters through, porters coming, and you step to one side and let the porters by. We stop regularly, maybe every 50 minutes, an hour, for something to drink, support to drink regularly, have something to eat, and as we're sitting having a rest, the porters are heading past to go on ahead and get camp established.
And is it quite, obviously people are sort of wearing t-shirts there, is it quite hot and humid
it can be
in the forest?
Yeah, it tends not to be cold in the forest. It can be wet, which I'll come on to, But yes, it's hot and humid. You need to be prepared for yeah, pretty hot walking conditions. So lots of water as well. And this is just to show you these fabulous forests we're walking through. And something I've often thought, it'd be wonderful to spend twice as long climbing Kilimanjaro if you could afford it, both time and money wise, because each vegetation zone is fascinating. These forests are delightful, and you could spend a whole day just wandering about, exploring them and investigating and taking pictures. So just to give you some idea of the variety of forest and photo opportunities.
And this is, it's really, it's the first day, isn't it, on, whichever route you're doing on Kilimanjaro, that you're in this sort of lower zone.
Dense forest. And then this makes a point. The reason the forests are there, obviously, is because it rains. These are subtropical rainforests. It's not quite tropics, even though you are just on the edge of the tropics here. You're starting at Moshi's at 900 meters. So you're starting walking at about 1,1200 meters. But your subtropical rainforest, it can be very, very wet. It can rain a lot. And it's actually wonderful when it does rain in the forest, but you can expect to get wet. And this makes the point of your footwear is very important, because it's really difficult if you start off, if you get your boots wet in the first few days, you want to have your boots dry for summit day because it can be very cold. So managing your footwear is important. And a good idea, always carry an umbrella, because it means with an umbrella, because it is very often hot and humid, the rains tend to be falling down straight. So you can walk in your trekking clothes without putting on waterproofs, but keep dry on an umbrella. Or you do the alternative, and the porters tend to carry the loads on their heads, so their umbrella is your porter load. and this makes a point that this is just to illustrate some of the poor great guys, but it also illustrates the point. Kilimanjaro is very often a first trip for a lot of people doing expeditions. And this makes a point that one of the details you learn doing expeditions is that your kit gets really badly hammered. So you need to pack your kit bags very carefully because the stuff gets crushed and squashed. Anything breakable in your kit bag can get damaged. This is just to acknowledge the porters, great guys. And the thing I like to suggest to people is try and find out. It's difficult to get to know all the porters because there's so many of them. But if you can get to know which porter's carrying your bag, they tend to carry the same loads every day. Is get to know your own porter and try and engage and get some kind of relationship going with them and acknowledge them. They're doing this as a job, and it's a tough job. But great guys. So typically, whichever route you're taking on Kili, you'll end up in a campsite in the forest. And again, as I've said, it can be raining heavily. So these first campsites can be pretty muddy, boggy, messy kind of places, and we've had a couple of occasions where we've not got into camp till after dark because of the logistics during the day and poor road conditions. So it can be quite testing the first night camping in the wet and the dark, and this is the crew the next morning sorting everything out in a fairly damp, soggy campsite. So not easy for these guys either. But on the Mosher Glades route, you come up above the forest into the heathland zone and onto the Shira Plateau, and this is Shira 1 campsite. The advantage of this approach, if you're doing Kilimanjaro without doing Mount Meru first, this is a much better approach because you have 3 nights camping before you kind of get to the Western Reach. So this is the start of the Shira Plateau and this wide open space. And I've put this picture in because Kilimanjaro is a freestanding mountain. It's supposed to be the biggest freestanding mountain in the world. But being a freestanding volcano, you're not surrounded by mountains, so there's a lot of sky. So it's although you're climbing a huge mountain, you're not in the mountains. This is Shira 2 campsite, again getting a bit closer to the mountain. And although it's there are other people on the trek, it's not as busy as some of the other routes, and the campsites are fairly open, so there's plenty of room for the campsites to spread out.
Could you just tell us a little bit about the sort of camping situation and mess tents and all that sort of stuff, Mungo?
Yeah, sure. You can see here we have a mess tent with us. We'll have individual tents for two a tent. There'll be a kitchen tent where the guys do the catering, and then toilet tents. But certainly something the big change over the last 20 years is just the improvement in the campsites. 20 years ago, there were wooden shacks as toilets with a hole in the floor, a pit below it, and most of them were unusable. They weren't managed properly, so the campsites were very unhygienic. Typically what happens now, some of the campsites have, toilets have been built, but typically we'll carry our own toilet tent. We have a porter, a dedicated toilet man, and we have a portaloo, one of these plastic porta potties, which he goes and disposes of every day. And the hygiene and sanitation of the mountain is vastly improved. Typically the campsite routine, when you get all the campsites have a hut with a camp warden, and you have to sign in and register. How much they pay attention to the actual detail of employment and age, I'm not sure, but they do manage and try and monitor everybody up and down the mountain. And then this is a mess tent, so we have a dedicated kitchen crew who provide fantastic food. So as David was saying last week in his talk about, maybe putting on a little weight before you go on an expedition because you're likely to lose a bit of weight. And Kilimanjaro suggests you're unlikely to lose weight. You're catered for very well, and you're not on the mountain for that long.
I mean, it's partly, isn't it true that, because there are access roads coming in as you sort of traverse around the mountain, so it's actually quite straightforward to get, fresh resupplies, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. They bring fresh supplies up onto the mountain. And this is just to illustrate the point for another camp routine is tent maintenance. It's pretty harsh on the kit. It can be very muddy in the forest, it can be very dusty high up in the mountain. So keeping managing the tent, and again, people who haven't been camping before, very often we get people who haven't done much camping before. It's learning about looking after your tent, because your tent is your home. So we keep the zips lubricated and all the rest of it. So this is approaching Kilimanjaro from the west, from the Shira Plateau. We've come up above the vegetation zone. We're in the high desert, very little vegetation here. It's become very dusty, and come to the Lava Tower camp. This is where the routes, if you come up directly to do the Western Breach route, if you've done Mount Nuru first, you wouldn't do this route. You come up either the Umbu or the Machami, and you come up to Lava Tower. Lava Tower is at, let's see, where are we? Yeah, we're at 4640 here, so we're quite high. If you're going to go up to the Western Breach route, which is the most difficult of the so-called trekking routes, this involves a bit of scrambling. You come up to high camp underneath the Western Breach. And this is the Western Breach in very dry conditions. And the next picture shows it in very different conditions with a lot of snow on it. So again, it's a big mountain. It can snow here, particularly at Christmas time. And if you get there, like any mountain, if you get there and there's too much snow or the conditions are too difficult, then you can't do it. So, but the conditions can be very hot.
And the route goes up here, doesn't it, Mungo? It's just the feature they call the train. Is that right? That's
more up the middle of the wall there. The route it wanders about. You can go different ways, but it tends to that slope there, the breach wall. Yeah, and it's a mixture of rock and scree, little buttresses. It's not difficult climbing, but it involves a bit of scrambling, and with a bit of snow on it, it can make it interesting. This is looking down. I don't have very many pictures of it, obviously, because it's always dark when we do it. This is looking back down it to give you some idea of the sort of slope. It's about just under 3,000 feet, 2.5 to 8,000 feet of continuous gravel, rock, scree, buttresses. And this is a picture taken very early in the morning, and gives you some idea of people scrambling about and the shadow of Mount Kilimanjaro being cast onto the plains behind. And this makes the point, it's one of the few places on an expedition where I've got the bivvy shelters out just to get the group warmed up again. It can be extremely cold. Although it's not as high as some of the bigger peaks in the Himalayas and the Andes, it can be bitterly cold here. So we've got onto the plateau, the sun's come up, but it's still very cold, and we've got the group shelters out to get people out the wind and get warmed up a bit before we go to the summit. This was taken looking back. The Western Breach comes up just behind that little glacier there and comes across the plateau. And this is the Fort Wengler Glacier in 2000. And the next picture is of it in 2016. So deglaciation is happening fast. Again, the statistics of it, they reckon that something like 40% of deglaciation happened between 2000 and 2011. when the first ascent in 1889, they had to cut steps because the whole summit was covered in glacier ice. They reckon that by certainly the next 20 to 40 years, all the ice will be gone. So it is melting fast. From the plateau, the final summit, if you're doing it from the Western Breach side, goes up this final slope, 150-metre slope, and the top is up there on the left. So there's this final slope to climb. But if we skip across, we're now going from the lava towers. If you do the Lamorso Glades route, we contour down from the lava tower camp to the Barranco camp, and this shows the type of terrain to the Barranco camp. Barranco camp is where all the routes converge, and this can be very busy. So you get a congregation of teams coming up all the different routes, but it's a very spectacular site looking back up towards the breach wall and the Western Breach.
So yeah, it's worth just clarifying. So with the nowadays the trekking route that we offer does Mount Meru, and then we come up directly up to this camp to Barranco. Yeah. Via the Umbe route, which is just 2 days, I think, to get up to here.
That's right. The Umbe route only has one campsite on it. So if you were doing Kilimanjaro without doing the Western Breach, typically what people will do is come up one of these routes with one campsite, come to Barranco camp, and then going up to summit. So people are trying to climb the mountain in 4 or 5 days, which is ludicrously fast. So if we did the Umbe route directly, we have one campsite. And this shows the part of the Umbe route. It comes directly up the south slopes, and there are some short, fairly steep sections on it, which in the past, again, were quite exciting. It was kind of Indiana Jones type of, slippery, muddy, vegetated, steep slopes, which have been sanitized. They built steps up them now. But you come up to the Barranco camp, where in the past we'd have spent 2 nights. There you spend the second night at Barranco camp, which is at 3,900, just under 4,000 metres. So we spent 2 nights there to acclimatise. But it offers fantastic views of sunset on the breach wall. And the icicle up there on the right was done by Reinhold Messner in 1978. He described it as the most dangerous route he'd ever done because of the fall, and I suspect it hasn't been done for several years now, because the place is falling to bits. But again, this just illustrates the varied weather you can expect. It's a big mountain and it forms its own weather. It's a wonderful campsite and plenty of opportunity to explore and take photographs, combining the mountain with the vegetation. So continuing up the trekking route from Barranco, we'll typically get up with the sunrise. Sunrise comes up behind the Barranco wall. The Barranco wall is a large volcanic wall, and I've learned from experience to hold back here because the Barranco camp can have 600 or 700 people in it on a regular basis. So, and they all leave at first light to go up this path up the Barranco wall. And I've learned to hold back and let the crowds go, partly because it's not much fun. It also gives you a much more sense of enjoying climbing the mountain on your own. But you can see on the path there just a continuous line of people and porters. And it's not just the people, it's these hundreds of porters carrying loads on their backs, on their heads, on some quite steep, scrambly ground. So it's better to have the place to yourselves. There are a few places, not a difficult climb, but there are a few places where you need your hands, a bit of scrambling. But anywhere there's a tricky step, you'll have a guide there to support you and help you. And a few wee down steps, the same thing. And again, much easier to have this to yourself than be queuing up with dozens of other people and porters with heavy loads.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great, I mean, that just shows it, the benefit of having an experienced leader that knows that, you can hold back and wait for the crowds to go, and then head up later. This is just our own team on our rocky section. Imagine that with 60, 70, 80 other people all trying to get past, and of course you stand and let the porters go through, and you can have a line of 20 or 30 of porters, and then the next trekking team sneak in behind them, so it can all get quite congested. But top of the Barranco wall is a real sense of you're getting somewhere. People generally feel that they're really achieving something. It's quite an exciting little scramble, so a good opportunity for
a group photo. And the other advantage of holding back is that the route beyond the Barranco wall descends slightly and then traverses right around to the east side of the mountain. And it's much nicer to have this to yourself. It can be very dusty again, you have dry ground, and just a sense of open space and having the mountain to yourself. And that takes you into the Karanga camp. And then above the Karanga camps at just over 4,000, so you've dropped a bit of height. And then you go from the Karanga camp, we put in a night there and start trekking up the hill to make for Barafu, which is the final camp before the summit. But from Karanga, looking back down, this illustrates the point that you don't go to Kilimanjaro for the solitude anymore. It has become very popular. It's difficult to get numbers, but it's estimated that between 35 and 50,000 people a year now attempt Kilimanjaro. And coming back to statistics, on average, it's probably round about 50 or 60% of people out of that 35 to 50,000 actually summit. But that number dramatically increases the longer you spend on it. So again, moving above the Karanga camp, going up to the Barafu, you can see the Barafu hut right on the skyline ridge there. And again, a lot of people on the trail. So the Barafu camp again can be very busy. From Barafu, we'll typically leave at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. So again, I don't have any pictures of the route in the dark, but this is a view in the daytime looking up at the route, and it goes up there between those two snow. There was quite a lot of snow on it this particular year, but there was a clear route that was clear of snow, and it goes up scree slopes. We tend to go up sticking to rock as much as possible, walking up rocky buttresses, which doesn't involve climbing. You can walk it with ski poles, but it's easier coming down. We tend to come down the scree, which is a lot looser, but very dusty. And the next picture, I think, illustrates that. This is coming down those slopes, so it shows the kind of slopes it is. Huge scree slopes. If you enjoy scree running, that's the easiest way to come down this, is to run down it. But on a windy day, it can be filthy. And that shows you the Barafu camp down to in the middle picture on the right there.
And could you just sort of talk about how a typical summit day might work, Mungo, and how you sort of try and manage a group? Obviously, we have quite a few local guides supporting you. How does it work, setting off at midnight in the dark?
Well, what we'd typically do is again, with experience, if we've got a big group and there's a range of fitness in the group, then it's quite easy. We can even split the groups. We can send some people off at 10 or 11 o'clock at night with some of the guides, and then the others leave later, maybe 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, and end up converging on the top. So that's possible. But we'll typically leave at usually before midnight from Barafu. Typically leaving the camp as well, because it's busy, it can take quite a lot of time to clear camp, and the first hour or two in the dark can be a bit frustrating because a lot of other teams all moving very, very slowly. But as you go higher up the mountain, they tend to spread out and you get the place more to yourself. And that last picture, this just shows the sunlight coming up. And it's always wonderful when the sun comes up and you start getting warm. And again, this illustrates as you go higher, the regular rest. And I'm not sure if they're grinning or grimacing, but it's fairly exhausting. But like I say, the relief of the sun coming up, but we're still well dressed up, duvets and warm gloves, hats and buffs. But this is
and even goggles there. Somebody's got on.
Yeah, and goggles. Again, I would suggest goggles for the dust as well. If it's windy, the dust can be it gets everywhere. And this is you get to Stella Point, which is Stella Point is it's got the thing there for. It's about 150 meters short of the summit. The summit's on the end of the ridge in the background there. So we get to Stella Point, and then to get to the top, it's about another half an hour, 40 minutes to get to the final summit. And that's the summit of Kilimanjaro. But the trip's not over, because you then have to descend. We go all the way back down to Barafu, have a short break, pack up Barafu camp, get down. There are 2 other camps on the way down, try and get to the lower camp for the night, because the next morning we have to leave the park, get back to Moshi, and then fly home that night. So it's a full-on trip. And I'll leave you there on the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro with another Catascar flying.
Super. Well, that's That's great, Mungo. Thank you for that. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll move on to some questions. So if people they can use the Q&A function. If you've got any questions for Mungo about Kilimanjaro, then fire away. Or indeed, if you've got other questions for Mungo, I mean, Mungo's probably he's led 75 trips for us. He's certainly led more trips to Nepal than anybody else. So he's got a lot of experience in Nepal. But yeah, so here's a question I have. So this is a contentious one. Jambo Mungo, this is from Amin. He would like to hear your views around Diamox use on Kilimanjaro. So what are your thoughts on Diamox? I don't know if people have heard of Diamox. So, well, I'll let Mungo explain.
The expression I use is there's evidence that Diamox can assist with the acclimatization process. My own personal view is to see how you get on climbing a mountain, a high mountain. Diamox, it helps with acclimatization in the sense. The problem with going high is that we're subjecting ourselves to a lack of oxygen, and the body needs to acclimatize to do that. So the argument is that taking medication to assist your acclimatization could be beneficial. The problem with that is if you start taking Diamox when you set off on the trip and then find you're not acclimatizing well, there's nothing you can really do to assist the process. So if you hold back and see how you get on, you might get on fine without it. If you're not acclimatizing on the way up, you can then, and you haven't been taking it, you can then start taking it, because that might then assist the process. But it's not a panacea. It doesn't mean because you take Diamox you will acclimatize, and it doesn't mean because you start taking it is going to make you suddenly acclimatize. So my own personal view would be to see how you get on, but take it with you.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, so we got question here from Larry. When is the best time to go to Kilimanjaro?
Yeah, good question. I think you can climb Kilimanjaro more or less any time of the year, but the popular times are Christmas time and summertime. I suspect that might be because of people's holidays around the world. Christmas time, you're more likely to get snow. It could be a lot colder. So I think summer, August, September is very popular. The problem with then is because it's popular, it can be very busy. So if you're doing one of the popular trekking routes, you can expect there to be a lot of people on it.
Okay. Question here from Louis. How do you know when you're fit enough? Can people get fit on the trek, which is actually what sort of David was saying last week, or is it too late by then? It's obviously a short trip, isn't it?
Yeah, no, great question, Louis. You need to be fit before you go there. You get fit on treks, like David was saying on the trek. You're out the bus and climbing the mountain. And what I say to people is you want to be hill fit. So any sort of exercise is going to be beneficial: cycling, swimming, running. But walking around Richmond Park, even with a rucksack on, it doesn't simulate climbing mountains. So you have to get hill fit. And we get a lot of people on Kilimanjaro doing this as their first expedition, their first big mountain, or even their first mountain, and they find it extremely tough. And the advice I give people is you want to get out on the hill, but you also need to develop stamina, and particularly for summit day. None of the days on the trip are physically particularly demanding if you're used to hill walking, mountaineering, and expeditioning. Summit day is no more than climbing Ben Nevis, but you're starting a lot higher. So what I suggest to people is, as part of their getting fit for this, is not just to get hill fit, but to do their day's hill walking, do their 6, 7, 8 hour hill walk, and then go out again for another 3 or 4 hours when you don't really feel like it, because that's the kind of stamina you need to have to cope with these summit days.
Okay, great. And this sort of this question from Jack leads on from that, talking about the Western Breach route. How would you compare it to, in terms of scrambling difficulty, to perhaps scrambles in the UK?
I find scrambling grading very difficult to assess, but put it this way, we don't carry ropes. I have on one occasion short roped one person up the Western Breach because he started bobbling quite alarmingly, but we typically won't use ropes on it. So, and it's not difficult climbing, but there are places where you need to use your hands for balance. There are a few places where you potentially could fall off and fall a significant distance, but it's not. You're not on a huge cliff, and it's not difficult rock climbing. But again, with snow on it, it can make it awkward, because if the snow is frozen during the night, it can be slippery. So you get sections of hard frozen snow. There's a lot of loose ground on it as well, so you're on and off snow and rock. But it's not difficult technically, and again, because it's done, you don't have the exposure because you can't actually see the drop below you.
I guess I mean, what we would say is, yes, it might not be as difficult as even a grade 1, grade 2 scramble in the UK, but certainly if you've done that kind of thing at sea level in the daylight, then that's going to set you up well for because you've obviously got the altitude factor on Kilimanjaro, and the fact that you're in the dark, which we don't tend to do, hopefully, here in the UK. Okay.
Curved Ridge in the Buchel, for example, in Glencoe, that's an easy climb, rather than a scramble. We would carry ropes on that with people that haven't done any scrambling before.
There's a question from Carol here. Fascinating talk, thanks. Great to learn about the practical details. I've always wondered why Kili treks don't allow more time for descent, as that would make it more enjoyable. I mean, that's true, isn't it? It is a big old descent down off the summit.
Yeah, I think that we've talked about this a lot over the years, that I would enjoy a Kilimanjaro trip that was twice as long, and spend a second night in every campsite and be able to go and explore all the different vegetation. What makes Kilimanjaro interesting is you're going from semi-tropical rainforest to Arctic tundra. So when you come down the mountain, you're literally coming from the polar regions to the tropics in a matter of about 12 hours walking. And it is a shame to rush through that. I suspect the majority of people, I don't know the majority of people, but I suspect the majority are climbing Kilimanjaro to reach the summit. And the joy of Kilimanjaro is in the diversity of the landscapes that you're going through, the geology, the flora and fauna, and even the history of the place. So yes, you're absolutely right. It'd be much nicer to spend longer, but it's probably mainly driven by commerce. It's a commercial thing. Even the Jagged Globe trip is a 10-day trip. A lot of people try and do Kilimanjaro in 5 days, and the old maxim, time is money, is time off work, and it's a relatively expensive trip to do. Now you have to pay for all the support crew, you have to pay for the permit on a daily basis. So the shorter time you can spend on the mountain, then the cheaper in terms of time and money. But if you want to enjoy it, the longer you can spend on it, the better. There's so much to see, and the summit day is going to be so much easier because you'll be so much more acclimatized.
Question here, just I mean, something you touched on in the talk. I mean, how much has Kilimanjaro changed since you first went up it? Quite a broad question. I mean, obviously we looked at the glaciers and things like that. I mean, more people.
Yeah, more people. Deglaciation is blatantly obvious, but that's obvious throughout the world. I mean, that's happening. Definitely more people, but again, that's happening throughout the world. Tourism has exploded. Adventure tourism has exploded in the last 30 years. There are a lot more people. The thing that has changed, I think, when I first went there, I got the impression that the local guides, I wouldn't be surprised if they were given bonus for getting people on the top, because we'd see people literally being pushed and pulled, people who were quite obviously needing to go down. And I think a lot of the local agencies have got wise to the idea that it's much better to get your clients down alive than get the summit dead. The fatality rate is unfortunately relatively high because people are trying to climb it too quickly. And I think a lot of the local agencies have got wise to this. and I've learned a lot more about acclimatization. Sanitation in the mountain has become a lot better. The management of campsites and hygiene. And for the last couple of times I've been up, I've noticed, particularly on summit day, an awful lot of rubbish on the trail. The campsites themselves are much better managed and more hygienic, but certainly on summit day there's a lot of litter has been dumped by whoever's on there. A lot of orange juice cartons and just rubbish that's been dropped. A lot of these hand warmer sachets have been dumped as well. So it's always annoying to see that.
So we obviously talked about a few routes. We do the Western Breach and the Umbwe around to the Barafo and up to the summit these days, but previously, and some of your photos with the Lamosho Glades. On the north side, there's the Rongai, and then there's the Machame as well as the other popular route, and then of course the Marangu route, which comes in from the west, from the east, sorry, which was I guess the shortest route. I mean, that it had huts all the way, or has huts all the way up. I mean, somebody's asking sort of which is your favourite route, or which one do you think's the best route?
If you're just climbing Kilimanjaro without doing Mount Meru first, I'd suggest the Shira Plateau, the Lamosho Glades route. It's a lovely walk in, and it gives you a bit longer to acclimatise. But the Umbwe and Machame routes are fun because of, like I say, some vegetation and some steep scrambling on. But you'd want to have done Mount Meru first. I haven't done the Rongai route round from that comes in from Kenya from the north. The Marangu route, its nickname is a Coca-Cola route because it's the most popular. So I suspect that might be more congested and have more people on it. So it's maybe an easier approach. I think it's an easier walk in. The Umbwe and the Machame that come directly up from the south, like I say, are a steeper climb, and more direct. But it's funny, people ask me what's my favourite trip, what's my favourite trek. I don't have favourite. It's the one I'm enjoying at the time.
And it's as much about the people, of course, on many of these trips.
It's the people, it's the circumstances of the particular trip, yeah. And they're all interesting walks. What I would say is, however you do Kilimanjaro, it's a fabulous walk. It's a just fascinating trek. There's just so much to see.
Question here from Dominic. Fascinating talk, thank you. What sort of food do you eat on the trip?
Oh, excellent food. Chicken and chips is regularly served up. You have that 3 or 4 times during the trip. The catering's excellent. We had a problem for many years trying to sort out decent packed lunches, but I think we've got that resolved now. But the catering on the trip is excellent. They can bring fresh supplies up onto the mountain, like you were saying, and the catering crew are very good. So excellent food.
Okay, let's just try and get last couple of questions. We're just sort of running out of time a little bit here, but here's one from John. This is a more general question. I've heard Stock Kangri, which is in northern India, is closed for a couple of years for a cleanup. Could you recommend another 6,000 meter peak? Many thanks.
Cool.
So just generally a 6,000 meter peak.
Mount Mira in Nepal.
Yeah.
It's a lovely trek. It's not technically difficult. It's a bit higher. It's 6.4, Tom?
6.476, I think.
Yeah. So it's a bit higher, but it's a wonderful walk in. The way Jagged Globe do it, they do an extended walk in for acclimatization, and it's not a technical climb, and it's a really enjoyable peak.
Great. And then last question here from Tony. He's asking, is Elbrus a good first mountain before Kilimanjaro? Elbrus in the Russian Caucasus, of course.
Well, I can't answer that because I haven't actually done Elbrus. It's one of the trips I haven't done. I was going to do that 20 years ago, and then the area got closed down because of terrorism, and I've not been there. But I understand it's a very tough summit day. Elbrus is lower, but it's a tough summit day. But again, because it's a fairly long day on a relatively short itinerary. So it's a very tough summit day apparently, but I can't speak personally how it would compare.
Yeah, but I think most people would go, they would go to Elbrus typically after having climbed something like Kilimanjaro, And then, you know, on Elbrus you need to use ice axe and crampons, so you certainly need to have got that experience in Scotland or the Alps. Then the way we climb Elbrus from the north is a very big summit day, so it would be a tougher summit day than the summit day on Kilimanjaro. Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks Mungo for that. That was great. Love seeing your photos, especially some of the photos in the jungle. Just as you say, you know, it'd be nice to have more days in there in a way to explore the lower reaches of the mountain. But I think we'll wrap it up there. So thanks again, Mungo, and we'll see you again soon. Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So just another reminder that next week, or same time on Tuesday, we're going to have Becky Coles with us, and we're going to talk about expedition preparation and planning. So please join us for that. Finally, I'd just like to mention we're still going with our campaign to support our staff in Nepal, the Sherpas, and well, all of our staff, not just the Sherpas, but cooks, porters, all those who would normally be involved with the spring season. We're getting closer to our target, but just like to thank everybody who's donated to that campaign. So that's it, folks. We'll look forward to talking to you again next week with some more stories about time in the mountains and getting into expedition mountaineering and trekking. Thanks again. Goodbye.